Hi, this is Cathy Gnatek. I complete my series on the 36 decans of the Zodiac today with Pisces III, the last 10 degrees of the sign. If Pisces 1 was about the moment when we become the spiritual seeker and perhaps later the spiritual teacher, and Pisces 2 is a moment where we feel settled and comfortable in our spiritual quest. Pisces 3, the end of the entire zodiac, can have to do with this grappling with our demons, with questioning where we fit in the spiritual frame, with perhaps shaking our fist at God, a little bit like Job, but then eventually releasing and submitting to our littleness, right? That's the energy of Pisces 3. And when we do release and open and let go of the struggle, there's a certain divine inspiration and expansion to our being, this development of our spiritual consciousness. We've been from Aries 1, the very beginning of the zodiac, through all of the experiences of life, all of the decans of the zodiac, and come to this moment of fruition where we submit and we release and we let go, and kind of like at the balsamic moon where we let go into the unknown and get ready for a new cycle. So that's a lot. We'll talk about some symbolism that really helps explain the energy of this part of the zodiac. Of course, we'll talk about the tarot card associated with it, the 10 of Cups. We'll talk also about the Hermetic Kabbalah Malkuth, the last of the Sephirah, where we get to the moment of manifesting in this life, right? And I'll give you a great example of somebody who has their rising degree here, Johnny Cash, who lived a really interesting life. And of course, we'll also talk about the decanic rulers, which are Mars under both the Chaldean order and the Triplicity system. There's a lot to chat about. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you do, it'd be great if you could like and subscribe. I'm not sure what my next project will be, but I do know I want to continue making these videos. I love to teach. It's a great way for me to learn. So, and also I love to share with the world. Anyway, so let's talk first about the sign of Pisces and the energy that it brings as a whole, right? So Pisces is a water sign, having to do, all water signs have something to do with our emotion, our intuition, the unconscious. When we get to Pisces, it's more the water of the vast oceanic oneness of the universe. We start out with Cancer, and it's about me and my emotions. It's the individual water sign. We move to Scorpio. It's about me connecting with another person, right? It's this deep desire to connect. That's the second of the water signs. We get to Pisces, and it's more about community and relationship, our relationship to the world, to the greater expansive universe, let's say. And so it's a water sign, and it's ruled by Jupiter again, this planet of abundance and optimism and expansion, growth. We're really going to see the growth quality of Jupiter in this last decan of the zodiac. We're talking about this moment of spiritual maturation and growth. And lastly, of course, Pisces is a mutable sign, so there's a certain flexibility and adaptability to its energy. We see that with Johnny Cash and his chart, that his capacity to mature spiritually required him to adapt and change and let go of an old persona. And finally, we can also talk about the myth associated with Pisces. I did that in depth in the first video. I'll drop a link to Pisces 1 below, and you can check out the myth to help you flesh out that the energy. So when we're talking about the decan individually, the rulers are Mars and Mars. So Jupiter rules the sign as a whole, But this particular decan is ruled by Mars under the Chaldean order and Mars under the Triplicity system. I have Chaldean there twice. That's just a little typo. And it's interesting because this is the same as Aries 1. The decanic rulers for Aries 1 are Mars and Mars. And so with Aries 1, it's that moment when we're breaking into the universe. Aries is a fire sign, it's ruled by Mars. So it's the moment of the baby's birth and that cry and that demand, I exist, I'm emerging into the world. Now we have sort of, you could think of it as an ending or a completion or a struggle with life and a struggle to open to life with this last decan of the zodiac, to let go, right? It's the ending. Endings are hard, and so sometimes we struggle. And so there can be the struggle with Mars, but Mars can also represent courage to, and so you could see one part that we're going to see with people with points and placements in this decan is they can resist or push away initially um, uh, the difficulties of life. They can see maybe the darkness of life and not want their innocence to be penetrated. Maybe a little bit, I think I said in the intro, like Job shaking his fist at God. There can be that energy, but ultimately there can be a courage to stand and be present to one's littleness and submit to uh, the vicissitudes of life, submit to the fact that we're not in charge and serve something greater than ourselves. And we really see the serving something greater than ourselves that comes with the spiritual maturity of this part of the zodiac. Again, in the chart of Johnny Cash, who went through his own personal struggles, but then used those personal struggles, grew up, and um, took his own personal difficulties and used them to help the world, to bring a deeper spiritual message of faith, but not an immature faith, a real faith tested by the waters of life into the world. I keep going back to Johnny Cash because he is such an excellent example of the energy of both the positive side of this and the potential shadow side of this last decan of the zodiac. So think about courage and struggle with that Mars energy. Then looking at the tarot cards that are associated with this part of the zodiac, we get to the 10 of Cups in the Rider-Waite. We'll also look at the Thoth card. The Rider-Waite card really emphasizes more the positive, mature, evolved aspect of the last decan of the zodiac. Here we see what appears to be a family, like at the children are at play, the parents are happy, there's a rainbow above, life is beautiful, there's an openness to life, right? But that's at first blush. When you take a deeper look, the deeper esoteric significance of this card, you can imagine that those two children that are at play in innocence in their enclosed little bubble are those represent the adults on the left, right? When they were children. When we're children, we have a certain innocence and a joy in life because we haven't experienced what it can be tested by life. But after we've been around that whole zodiac, right, and we're sort of toward the end, we've grappled with life, and the question is, are we going to embrace it in its fullness? Are we going to have that Jupiterian faith in life? Right. And that's what we see with the adults here. They have joy and they have openness, but their joy is a mature joy that came out of the fullness of what it is to be a human being having lived through life experience. And they are submitting and they have a certain joy that comes out of acceptance, right? The acceptance of reality and the reliance on an energy or a force that's greater than who they are. Um, when we look at the Thoth card, that's where we see Aleister Crowley. When he talks about this decan of the zodiac, he does show these 10 lotus cups and they're overflowing, right? That's that Jupiterian energy. And there's a harmony. It's just spilling all over everything. And there's this idea of satiety, which means being full, is the word or the description Thoth has for this card. So it's happiness expanded to the point of saturation. It's emotional force. Mars rules the decan, dissolving into spiritual unity and devotion. So there can be people with points and planets in this part of the zodiac can be overwhelmed with the amazing energy of life and hope. But they can also, the flip side of that is it can go a little bit to doom and gloom and overwhelm because we have Jupiter, the planet of abundance, with Mars, which can be a heavy planet about protecting oneself and conflict and difficulty, right? And so that's the shadow side of the card. Austin Coppock, when he talks about this in his series on the Decans, talks about going for the hope and doom. That can be sort of both parts. And the idea is to be someone, or the, you could say, the most evolved energy of this part of the zodiac or this card would be to have hope in the face of being consciously aware of life and what it brings, to have suffered through and continue to persevere and have faith and be open and take everything that life has to offer. Um, yeah. So then we can look at the Kabbalah and the Tree of Life and where does this particular part of the zodiac fall? And you can tell what part of the Kabbalah is related to Decan and the zodiac by looking at the tarot card. The number of the tarot cards corresponds to a sephir on the Tree of Life. And here we're going to see that this is the 10 of Cups. So we're down at the bottom of the Tree of Life, Malkuth, which is this moment of manifestation in the world. The Tree of Life is a mystical diagram that represents the descent of divine inspiration into the material world. You start at the top, Cater, where spiritual insight or energy comes in and inspires movement, but then we move through a lightning flash. It traces the flow of that creative energy from divine source at the top into the physical real world at the bottom, Malkuth. That's why I keep emphasizing with this deck and the idea of it being about what's real, what can be really manifested in the world around our spiritual faith that comes with being an adult versus the fantasies we may have as a child, right? Around what life is like. So we can see with Pisces 3, we're moving from the 9 Yesod to the 10 Malkuth on the Tree of Life. And as I said earlier, the number 10 corresponds to the sphere of manifestation, embodiment, and completion, where inner realities take visible form. Moving from 9 Yesod to 10 Malkuth describes the descent of inner fulfillment into lived experience. Yesod holds the pattern, Malkuth makes it real, and the 10 of Cups, emotional harmony, is no longer private. If we looked at the 9 of Cups, it's this fat, happy guy with 9 cups behind him. It's all about sort of individual happiness. When we move to the 10, it's more shared, expressed, and embodied in the world. Malkuth grounds joy into family, community, and tangible life. And in Pisces, this becomes emotional wholeness, belonging, and the feeling of happily ever after that we kind of see in that 10 of Cups card. Yet Malkuth is this dense and earthly energy. When it descends, it has to sustain itself in reality. So, as I talked about earlier, the shadow side of that Ten of Cups or the Malkuth can be the over idealizing happiness, emotional excess or overwhelm, or disappointment when reality disrupts the dream. And so that's grappling with questions around disappointment can very much also be a part of people with points and placements in this part of the zodiac. Um, but Malkuth's deeper lesson is completion is not just reaching joy, but maintaining it in the real world, where love must be lived, tested, and renewed. We really see this with the chart of Johnny Cash. So you can even think about his life and the way that his story in part stems from that loss of innocence as a child. So when he was 12 years old, his older brother, who was 15, went to work one day. Johnny did not go with, and ended up having this horrific accident. He died about a week later. And a big part of what Johnny Cash has identified as part of his struggle was this sense of survivor's guilt that he hadn't gone with his brother to work that day. And that kind of ended up defining his life for a little while, this darkness. His brother was apparently quite religious and had a lot of faith and had planned to become a preacher. And something happened with Johnny. I think this is my sense from having read some of what he speaks about his life is he ended up taking on that guilt and creating a persona that was kind of dark, seeing himself as bad as perhaps that he was the one that should have died. Now that's just an idea I have, but just in general, he very much thought his brother was the good one and he wasn't. And so he ended up becoming addicted to amphetamines, and he was arrested, and he really spiraled, in his career. He started out in the 50s and 60s, kind of identified with the bad boy image and playing that up. And then he became a bad boy himself, and his life kind of fell apart. He lost his first wife. His first marriage ended, and then June Carter Cash ended up helping him. And ultimately, he married her, but she kind of said, "Hey, wake up! You got to grow up here." And so he ended up openly admitting his addiction, and he returned to his faith. Faith was very much a part of what he grew up in, a very Christian household. And it's interesting with that evolution and grappling with his own darkness and the reality of his disappointment in life. He was obviously disappointed or broken up by death at a very young age. And that impacted him in a big way. And one of the ways it can be a childlike way to respond to death, but one way is to be like, this shouldn't have happened, to be angry with God, right? And to take it out and then to not want to participate in life. Addiction is a way that we escape life, among other things. And so he entered this space where he had, in some ways, fought against faith and God. You could say that Mars energy of the Decan. And then grappled with that, grew up, and returned to his faith in a way where he was open to the experience of life, not rejecting life, thinking it should be other than it is. And then his music and his activities in the world reflected that integration. He brought his renewed faith, his renewed trust in something greater than himself, and the reality of what it is to be a human being in the world into his music. So, and to his activities in the world. So, for example, rather than just being the bad boy, this idea that he was a criminal, that he was tough, he actually went and visited prisons and saw what it was like to be a prisoner in the real world and started doing work around prison reform, and working with incarcerated men and bringing his faith out into the world in that really abundant way. And that continued for the remainder of his life. Um, so he took his own personal difficulty, his own lack of maturity, kind of turned it around, matured, and made a difference in the world. And, you know, yeah, I just think it's a beautiful story. Um, and it really exemplifies what can sometimes be the struggle and the reward of this part of the zodiac, that you become a vehicle for something greater than yourself, that you can change the world or have compassion toward the world coming out of your own internal struggle. So I hope you enjoyed the video. And I hope to see you soon for whatever next project the spirit moves me to bring into the world. So thanks again. Have a great day.